around on Author's Corner. Really pleased to be joined by Larry Rhodes. The name of one of his books, and the book that we're going to talk about, Nothing But the Truth. Larry, thanks so much for coming on America Tonight with me, Kate Delaney.
Glad I could do it.
First of all, let's talk about your background. I mean, you've authored so many technical papers in the oil and gas industry. What led you to start to write screenplays? How'd that happen?
That was purely an accident. At one time, my wife and I came out of a movie, and I told her, I said, that was terrible. I could do better than that, writing it. And she said, well, why don't you? So it was kind of like a challenge, and I never really thought about writing anything like that. So I went and bought some screenplay software, and I didn't really know much about screenplays, but I found a place called Drew Scriptorama where you could download, there's like 1,000 movie scripts that you can download. So I downloaded like probably 100 over time, and just to read them, to see, thinking about what it says on the page versus what it was in the screen. And it's a very difficult format to adopt at first because it was written on a typewriter in the 20s and the 30s, and the way it's formatted, the goal is that one page of the screenplay is 1 minute on the screen. And so that greatly limits what you can put in terms of detail and everything like that. So it's nothing like writing like a short story or a novel or anything like that. It's very specific. And it took a while to figure out how to do it. But then once I figured that out, I said, well, what am I going to do now? So I had remembered something that I had heard many years ago, that something called voice stress analysis, where a couple of scientists had come up with a way to analyze someone's, I guess you would say, the voice stress when they're lying or not. So, and it actually, the thing that intrigued me was that right after President Kennedy was assassinated, that there was a time when they were leading him from the jail to the courthouse, and they went through an underground garage, and a couple of reporters were waiting for him. And so they started asking a bunch of questions, and he, of course, denied everything. But they were playing this recording through their voice stress analysis, and they would overlay their voices and said, he's lying here, he's lying here, he's lying here. And I was thinking, boy, that sure would change history and everything if you could have that kind of technology in the 60s. But it didn't exist because those kind of things just weren't available then, but they are now. And of course this was like probably mid 80s or early 90s. And so I kept thinking, maybe I could do something with that for a screenplay. But then I had a friend who was in pre-law and told me about all the issues around, using truth detectors and courts of laws and stuff like that, and all the reasons why you can't do it. So I had to think, well, maybe there's a ways around that. So maybe I could use some other techniques that I knew because I'm a chemist and my background is in optical spectroscopy. I could combine voice stress analysis with a couple other techniques and use what we at the time was called a neural network, which can pick out data from large data sets and find patterns and things like that. So that's why I came up with the idea of using blood flow in the face and using an infrared camera to look at that, figuring, well, if your voice stress changes while you're lying, maybe it affects the blood flow through your brain, and then through your face. So, and then also came up with the idea of looking at exhaled carbon dioxide, because everybody breathes in oxygen and exhales CO2, and then maybe that would change too because the stress that you're putting on your body. So I came up with the idea of using a way to shine an infrared laser in front of somebody and then look at the exhaled CO2, and then look, it's fluorescence actually, and then use this neural network to combine those three different techniques and determine with probably a data set, or a standard data set of someone not lying and someone lying, the probability of truth. So that's what kind of led to the different techniques. And I finally thought I had enough to do a screenplay, so I wrote Nothing But the Truth. That's where kind of the origin of that began.
Wow. And then talking about those techniques, and you think, what would be the value of an almost foolproof lie detector?
Well, can you imagine in a court of law if someone was lying, a witness was lying, and you couldn't tell them that you're recording something or you're measuring them, but the information could be given, say, with an earpiece to a prosecutor that would tell him on a scale of, say, 1 to 100, this is a lie or completely truth or whatever, or something in between. And he could change the way he's questioning somebody to determine what the truth really is. I think it would have a huge difference if people couldn't get away with lying in a court of law.
Oh boy, I think so too. And you think about what you're talking about here, and oh my gosh, the impact would be phenomenal, which makes the book so interesting. And it makes me think of how do you take this and you transition this from screenplay to novels? How do you take screenplays to novels? That has to be tough.
Well, actually, right after I wrote the Nothing But the Truth as a screenplay, I actually found a literary agent who was trying to help me, get it to producers and things. But then she retired for some reason, and it just kind of lingered. But I continued on writing more screenplays, even joined groups. At the time, they were called groups, or sometimes they're kind of like blogs today on the internet to learn more about it. And that's when I found out through that blog that there's 80,000 screenwriters in the world, and only 300 to 400 movies are made. So I said, my odds aren't very good for someone that's unknown getting made to a movie. So I thought, what else could I do? So I thought, well, maybe I could convert it to a book and have a better chance of, making, some success out of that. But there's a huge difference between screenplays and novels. Because of the format, a screenplay is typically no more than 120 pages because most American audiences don't want to, sit through more than 120 minutes or 2 hours of a movie. So in the format limits it so much that the typical screenplay is about 25,000 words, but a typical novel is 90,000 to 100,000 words. So you've got to put in all that extra detail that when, they would do it like a production team would do when they get together for the first time and read the screenplay, and, the clothing person figures out what clothing is needed, and the background person, the props person, all that stuff has to be put into the book because it's not there now. It relies on a production team to put that in for the movie. So it's a huge difference going from 25,000 words to 100,000 words. And it just takes a lot of thinking and figuring, well, maybe, how do I do this? So I even read some books, and like one of them is called Story, on how to make a good story from a screenplay. So that helped a lot too. And eventually, Nothing But the Truth became my first novel. And it was published like 1998 and stuff. That's a long time ago. But the one that you're probably talking about now is one that's just been republished. And that took a lot of work to redo it because technology has changed so much. Back in 98 or 99, there was artificial intelligence kind of existed, but it really didn't go anywhere for a long, long time because the hardware, machine processing and the computers and processing, all that stuff just wasn't strong enough for it. So it just kind of sat dormant for a long time until about 4 or 5 years ago. And then processors became available and everybody started spending lots of money on it. Now everybody seems to talk about artificial intelligence, but it's only been the last 4 or 5 years that it's really become really big. But that also impacts the book because now you have a lot more possibilities. What can I do with artificial intelligence that wasn't even available, through a neural network back in 98? So, and then there's a lot of other hardware and stuff that's changed and stuff. And now 25 years later, I have a son-in-law who's a lawyer who could help me. He reviewed the book and said, made a lot of suggestions and changes and said, well, you can do this, but I really wouldn't do that and that kind of stuff. Not that it was really wrong, but he said, I really wouldn't try to do that. So that helped a lot. So it was quite a bit of revision because of all the hardware changes and the technology and a little bit on the law.
And you also changed the cover. There's a new cover of this novel, and it is a courtroom scene. And it's, yes. You wonder, okay, how does this relate to the story and how you've changed it?
Yeah, that's a courtroom scene. And if you look I don't know if you have a copy, but.
Yep.
So down in the corner, yep, there's a laptop that shows an image of a person in infrared. So that's part of what the system would provide. There's an infrared camera looking at a witness on a witness stand, and then that's being displayed as an infrared image of looking at the blood flow of the person. So the system's also measuring voice stress and LCL2, and then calculating the probability of truthfulness from 1 to 100. So that's what that image on the screen is on the cover on the bottom. That's part of the system that's available. Now, the reason why it's in the back of the screen is because in the book, the judge is very skeptical. He's, when they tell him this is really about a lie detector, he says, no lie detectors in my court. And they try to explain to him that, it won't be really, you won't tell the person directly that he's lying or not, but the information will be available to the prosecutor, and then he can change the way he questions the witness. So the judge says, well, okay, but only if you put all that equipment in the back of the room where the witnesses and the jury can't see it. So that's why that computer is sitting in the back of the courtroom where nobody can really see it, but the information is still there. And now the prosecutor can, through an earpiece and the computer telling him, he can reevaluate his questioning or change his questioning stuff to try to get to the truth.
I love it. And you can get the book, of course, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever great books are sold.
Yes.
And just tell us briefly, because you got to get the book. You can get it for a song. It's a great read. Tell us briefly about Alan Atkins and what happened to him, a NASA scientist.
So in the story, the reason why a NASA scientist want to become involved in this is that he went through a pretty nasty divorce, and his wife, through her lawyer, convinced his wife to tell a bunch of lies about him so that he could get the divorce through. And so he was really angry that someone could tell us there's no way to prove, it's a lie or not if it's something happened between two people. So he said, okay, well, let me figure out how I can do that. So that's when he was also a spectroscopist, and he came up with the idea of the blood flow and the CO2 exhale. But also in the very beginning of the story, he's already aware of voice stress analysis, and he meets a bunch of his friends at a bar, test out the latest version of the voice stress analysis on some people in the bar, which is kind of impresses his lawyer friend, who says, if this really works, I have a friend of mine whose son was accused of murder. Maybe we could use your system over there. So that's how it got involved into a lawsuit and into a criminal trial. It wasn't anything that he thought about. He just wanted to come up with a system that could be used to detect lies and stuff, so people couldn't lie and get away with it.
I love it.
He kind of got dragged into it.
Oh, it's so good. Larry Rhodes, Nothing But the Truth. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.